Stay down! The voice cut through the smoke like a hammer, sharp, angry, and already too loud. The camera of a bystander's phone trembled as it tried to focus on the scene. All around, tension buzzed like an electric fence. Shouts echoed off the tall glass windows of the bank building, bouncing between flagless poles and overturned trash bins. Two young men in black hooded sweatshirts towered over an older man, shirt olive drab, his body low to the ground, one knee down, one palm raised between them, open. Not defensive, not aggressive, measured. The older man didn't speak. He didn't flinch. His skin was sun-leathered, jaw locked, eyes calm, too calm for the moment, as if this wasn't his first time being in the middle of something that had already gotten out of hand. Someone off camera yelled, "Why is he even here?" Another voice answered, "He's got a flag," was trying to hang it up. The phone panned. A small rectangle of cloth lay in the dirt behind the old man, still folded, corner caked in mud. The wind picked it up slightly, then let it fall. The younger man on the left shoved him again. "You want to be a symbol? Be one on the ground." The older man's elbow scraped against the pavement. Still no sound from him. No anger, no defense, only control. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. It wasn't coming closer, but boots were. A low, rhythmic march echoed from the east end of the square. 10 figures in camouflage turning the corner of Main and Fifth. Helmets, rifles, steady eyes. They weren't running, but they were coming. And they weren't looking at the crowd. They were looking at him. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The man's name was Clint Bishop, 79 years old, former gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, retired electrician, father of 2, widower. None of this was visible in the moment. None of it was written on his shirt, but it was there, etched in the way he knelt, in the angle of his back, in the steady stillness of his hands. Every Thursday morning for over 40 years, Clint walked 3 blocks from his apartment above an old barbershop to this very spot, the center of the civic square, to raise the flag by hand. Rain, snow, holidays. It didn't matter. He came. Same time, same route, same purpose. He carried no phone, no campaign button, no message board, just the folded flag, tucked into a simple canvas bag over his shoulder, and a quiet nod for anyone who happened to meet his eyes. He didn't smile often, but he acknowledged everyone. That was the deal. The flagpole at the center of the square had been erected in 1958. Clint had been raising the flag since 1982, the year his unit's flag was lowered for the last time in Okinawa. The act was private. He never invited press, never asked permission, and no one ever stopped him, until now. This morning, he had arrived 10 minutes earlier than usual. Something in the air had felt off. The tension had been building for days, demonstrations growing louder, windows being boarded, the local council sending out vague notices about safety conditions. Still, Clint came. He placed the bag on the stone base of the pole and reached for the rope. But when he touched it, he felt it slack and limp. The rope had been cut clean through, not frayed, not worn. Sliced, fresh. He pulled it from the pulley, held the severed end in his hand. Then he reached into his back pocket and withdrew something most wouldn't carry, a black plastic zip tie, already looped and trimmed. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to stop him. He sat on the crate he used as a stool, not the best for his knees, and threaded the zip tie through the pulley's groove. His hands moved slower than they once did. The knuckles were swollen, skin thin and stretched over ridges of old tendon. But his fingers remembered what to do. He focused, tuned out the shouting nearby, tuned out the thumping music from someone's portable speaker, the angry chants, the drone of tension climbing in the air. He just worked. Because for Clint Bishop, raising the flag wasn't political. It was a promise kept, a small piece of order, of history, of memory. And today, it was under threat. Clint had managed to loop the zip tie through the pulley bracket, his forearms braced against the metal shaft of the pole, when the first voice reached his ears, nasal, amused, and loud enough to be heard over the thrum of a distant megaphone. "What's he doing? Trying to bring back the good old days?" Clint didn't flinch. His hands kept moving, securing the rope like a sailor fixing a line to a mooring. He tucked the tail end of the zip tie with his thumb, gave it a tug, and nodded at the tension. Secure. Another voice joined in, younger, sharper. "Should have stayed in bed, Grandpa." Laughter followed, not cruel in volume but casual in its dismissal. The kind of laughter that stings more than it wounds, because it pretends you're not even worth hating, just irrelevant. Clint stepped back, inspecting the flagpole. The crate under him shifted. Someone behind had nudged it with a boot, not hard, but enough to make him stagger. His right hand shot out, gripping the cold metal pole to keep balance. The crate wobbled, then settled. He didn't turn around, didn't speak. Instead, he reached into the canvas bag and withdrew the flag, neatly folded in its triangle, the navy field with white stars facing outward. He held it like it was made of glass, not delicate, but sacred. The crowd near the square's fountain was thickening. Most of them were looking the other way, toward the courthouse steps where protest leaders had begun to climb the stone risers. But a handful of younger men loitered near Clint, half interested, half bored. "Yo, you think he even hears us?" Clint did. He heard every syllable, every scoff, every intake of breath. But his attention was fixed on the task. He moved slowly now, not because he was fragile, but because he believed in doing things with care. That belief had survived jungle ambushes, 2 marriages, 3 decades of 4 a.m. wiring jobs, and one long goodbye at a hospice bedside. He fed the new line through the flag's brass eyelets. The rope felt stiff in his hands, the nylon cooled by morning dew. A girl with a pink streak in her hair walked past and whispered something to a boy beside her. They both looked back at Clint and giggled. He didn't see their faces. He didn't have to. He could feel the weight of 100 small dismissals pressing in, the way air gets heavy before a thunderclap. He'd felt it in cities across the world. You didn't need bullets to know when you weren't welcome. Still, Clint adjusted the knot at the base of the flag. He wasn't going to raise it yet, not until the hour struck, but he wanted it ready. From a nearby bench, a man with headphones leaned back and muttered, "Just loud enough. Still thinks he's in Nam." Clint blinked once. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He looked at the pole, then the flag, then the sky, streaked with cloud and early sun. He was almost finished, but no one offered him a word, or a seat, or even space. And for the first time in 4 decades of Thursdays, he felt alone. The tension had grown thick by the minute, like a mist settling into the stone. It clung to the square, riding between raised voices and footsteps that no longer walked, but paced. The fountain sputtered behind the crowd, unnoticed. Clint Bishop stood beside the pole, flag still folded tight in his hands. His crate had been kicked a few inches away, leaving him to stand on the hard pavement. He didn't reach for it. He wouldn't bend to pick it up. Not now. A man approached from the outer ring of the crowd, lean, agitated, his hood pulled high over his brow. His face was red with heat or anger, or both. In his hand, he carried a half-empty water bottle, crumpled in the middle. "No flags today, old man," he shouted, voice bouncing off the hollow brick walls. "You're part of the problem." Clint turned only slightly, not in defense, but acknowledgement. His gaze met the man's for half a second, direct, steady, and utterly unimpressed. The man didn't like that. He moved faster than Clint could adjust, reaching for the veteran's shoulder and shoving him downward, hard enough to twist Clint's hips. The old man dropped to one knee, caught himself with his palm on the stone, the same hand that had once carried wounded men over broken ridgelines. The flag fell from his grasp. It unfolded as it hit the ground, not all the way, but just enough for one corner to drag across the dirt. The white stripe stained brown instantly. A nearby shoe kicked gravel toward it. Laughter erupted from 2 teenagers on the sidewalk. One of them filmed. "You like war? How's this for combat?" A woman standing across the street gasped and stepped forward. gray curls tucked beneath a red scarf, voice trembling but loud enough to pierce the ring of mockery. "Leave him alone!" A man standing beside her reached to pull her back. "Don't, you'll get hurt." "I said leave him," she barked again. A few people turned, but no one moved. On the steps of the courthouse, a protest organizer lifted a megaphone and tried to redirect attention, but the energy had shifted. The square had become a stage, and Clint, unwillingly, its centerpiece. A local store owner, the same man who swept this sidewalk every morning at dawn, stepped from his doorway shouting, "That's Clint! He's a Marine, show some—" He didn't finish. Someone in the crowd yelled back, "Then he should know when to stay down," and the man retreated inside, slamming the door shut behind him. Clint reached slowly for the flag, not with desperation, but with care, as if it still deserved to be folded, even in disgrace. Someone else spat on the pavement near him. The sound was louder than the act. "Still playing soldier," a voice sneered. Clint knelt again, fully now, both knees on the stone, elbows braced as he gathered the flag into his arms. Not to shield it, not to defend it, to honor it. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. His fingers worked in silence, folding the soiled fabric corner to corner, line to line. The crowd swelled around him, not in numbers, but in pressure. More phones raised, more murmurs grew. It was no longer mockery. It was judgment, thick and unrelenting. But through it all, he never raised his voice, and he never raised a hand. The crowd had stopped laughing, not because they'd grown ashamed, but because their jokes could no longer find a target. Clint Bishop sat on the cold stone ground, knees bent stiffly beneath him, the stained flag resting across his lap like a folded memory. His spine remained upright, not proud, but prepared, as if waiting for something unseen to pass over him. The air smelled of hot concrete, smoke, and burnt plastic, the cocktail of a city fraying at the edges. The megaphone had fallen silent now. Its bearer, uncertain whether to proceed, lowered it with a mechanical shrug and stepped backward. Even the protest leaders, armed with chants and slogans, seemed unwilling to step closer to the man they had just watched be shoved. A boy in a hoodie walked past and muttered under his breath, "He's just looking for attention," but the words had no teeth. Not anymore. Clint reached down and adjusted the final corner of the flag, gently pinching the edge to smooth it flat. It wasn't precision for show. It was a ritual, the kind of movement you do for decades, until it becomes memory, not muscle. Someone in the back of the crowd asked, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Clint did not speak. His lips were motionless, his eyes soft but alert. His breathing had slowed, measured, like a man preparing to lower a comrade into the ground. The last time he had folded a flag, it had been for his best friend, the one who bled out beside him in the belly of a burnt-out personnel carrier in 1969. He had folded that flag with shaking hands, alone, behind a field tent, because the chaplain hadn't made it in time. But today, his hands did not shake. A bottle cap skidded across the pavement. A man stepped forward as if to confront him, then thought better of it and turned away. Clint blinked once. That was all. He did not glance at the circle forming around him. He did not acknowledge the jeers that lingered like stale breath in the morning air. Instead, he tucked the flag beneath his left forearm and straightened his right bootlace, slowly, methodically, knotting it again with 2 fingers and the curve of his thumb. The movement said one thing: "I am not finished." Someone snorted from the edge of the square. "Look at him, like he's in a parade." Still, Clint did not rise. He bowed his head slightly, not in defeat, but in reverence, as if whispering to the memory of men who had worn the uniform before him, or maybe to the boy he once was, half a lifetime ago, sitting in a dirt foxhole with nothing but faith in the men beside him. He could feel the stone beneath him warming with sunlight. It pressed through the fabric of his pants and into his bones. He remembered a time when silence could command a room louder than any voice. And so, he stayed silent. The square's rhythm had changed. The noise hadn't stopped, not fully, But it had thinned. It had softened, as if something unseen had stepped into the space between the sounds. And something had. At the far edge of the square, where the shadows of a shuttered municipal building stretched long across the sidewalk, a line of camouflage uniforms stood watch. The National Guard hadn't moved. Not yet, but they had seen it all. Second Lieutenant Grace Nolan stood near the center of the line, her stance tall, the barrel of her rifle angled down and steady. Her helmet cast a narrow shadow across her face, but her eyes, sharp, gray, and observant, didn't blink. She had been watching Clint since the first shove. Her breathing had gone shallow when the flag touched the ground. It wasn't dramatic, just tight, the kind of breath soldiers take when their knuckles grip too tightly around restraint. She had grown up near this town, knew its rhythms, knew the sound of traffic here before protest, knew how Thursday mornings were usually quiet, how one old man with a folded flag would appear like clockwork, walking like he was pacing out memory. She hadn't expected him today, not after the warnings, not after the mayor's office said they couldn't guarantee safety. But there he was, kneeling, hands dirty, flag pressed against his chest like a prayer folded into cloth. Grace narrowed her eyes. To her left, a younger guardsman shifted his stance and muttered low, "We stepping in?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her jaw tightened. Her thumb flexed once against the side of the rifle. Her breath slowed even more. And then, she took a single step forward, not fast, not forceful, but unmistakable. And one by one, the soldiers on either side of her noticed. The youngest among them, barely past 19, followed her movement with his eyes, then his feet. To an untrained civilian, it would have looked like nothing, just a soldier adjusting her position. But in military posture, there are movements that mean everything. Her boots clicked once against the pavement. Clint didn't raise his head, but in the corner of his vision, something shifted. A presence, deliberate and rooted. Grace stopped 10 feet from him, her back to the crowd, her eyes scanning faces. Her fingers relaxed off the grip. She didn't lift her rifle. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The energy changed again, thinner now, curious, tense, and behind her, more boots began to move. Grace Nolan took 2 more steps forward. The stone beneath her boots echoed louder than it should have, not because of volume, but because of silence, the kind of silence that descends when something sacred is about to happen. She stopped just behind Clint Bishop's left shoulder, standing at ease but alert. Her weapon hung down, hands resting lightly against her vest. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. Behind her, a ripple of movement passed down the line of National Guard soldiers. One by one, 7 more broke formation. They did not shout. They did not glance for approval. No commands were issued. They just walked. Their boots tapped a rhythm against the pavement. Not a march, not a parade. Something quieter, something older. And then they formed a semicircle around the kneeling veteran, not to block him from sight, but to face outward. A human wall, back straight, eyes forward, weapons shouldered, but not raised. A message written in silence. This far, no further. The crowd didn't know how to respond. The ones closest stepped back first, not far, just enough to show unease, enough to show they now understood. There were boundaries. The man who had shoved Clint earlier narrowed his eyes and took one hesitant step backward. His arms dropped from his chest. His voice, once loud, stayed quiet. A woman recording on her phone whispered, "What's happening?" but didn't stop filming. Clint didn't move. He sat with the flag across his knees, still folded, still soiled from the stone. His hands remained pressed to the fabric, as if grounding himself in the only thing he could still control. Then Grace did something simple. She removed her helmet. It came off with a slow lift, both hands used, as if unwrapping something sacred. She tucked it beneath her arm and lowered her chin just enough to make eye contact with Clint. He looked up. Not far, just a tilt of the eyes, enough to register her presence, her stance, her silence. He blinked once, and that was all. Still no words. The square stood suspended in that moment. No horns, no chants, no movement. Just boots on stone, dust in the air, and a man who had refused to strike back, now surrounded by those who chose to stand beside him. No one clapped, no one cheered, but every heart watching understood. This wasn't politics, this wasn't protest, this was respect, embodied. The air felt thick enough to hold in the palm of a hand. Even the breeze that had tugged at posters and flags earlier now moved with caution, as though it, too, understood the weight of what had shifted. Clint Bishop remained kneeling on the stone, body steady, flag still pressed to his lap with careful reverence. Around him, the half-circle of National Guard soldiers stood like monuments, unmoving, unshaken, and unannounced. Grace Nolan stood just behind him, helmet tucked under one arm, the other hand resting flat against her thigh. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Her posture was perfect, but it wasn't formal. There was a humanity to the stillness, a gravity born of having seen too much and still choosing stillness over spectacle. She hadn't known the man in front of her until this morning, but somehow, in that square ringed by unrest and tempered now by silence, she felt as if she'd been waiting her entire career for this moment. Clint lifted his head slowly. His neck creaked under the years, the movement deliberate, neither in deference nor demand. His eyes met hers, not with desperation, but with something far older. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't expectation. It was recognition, like two veterans passing each other in the desert of time, nodding not to the uniforms, but to what had been endured beneath them. Grace returned the look. She did not smile. She did not salute, but she offered the smallest gesture, a nod, nearly imperceptible, the kind that said, "I see you." For a moment, nothing else moved. Then a younger soldier, barely out of his teens, stepped forward from the line, moving with hesitation, as if crossing a sacred boundary. He crouched before Clint, one knee to the ground, and held out his hands, cupped together. Clint looked at him, then at the object in his hands. It was the flag, not a fresh one. The same fold, the same smudge of concrete dust, the same story held in thread. Someone had retrieved it, dusted it gently, and carried it back as if returning a fallen comrade. Clint reached out with both hands. He didn't take it quickly. He didn't even lift it. He simply touched it, first with his fingers, then with the base of his palm, as though assuring himself it was real. The young soldier didn't move. He waited, kneeling, offering, holding space. Clint's fingers finally closed around the fabric and pulled it in. He placed it back in his lap with the same care, the same ceremony as before. This time, though, it was not alone. A murmur moved through the edge of the square, not from protesters, but from bystanders. People who had wandered close earlier, unsure if they were witnesses or intruders. Now they leaned in, hushed. There was no demand for explanation. The silence was explanation enough. Two more guardsmen adjusted their stance ever so slightly, as if anchoring the perimeter more deeply into the earth. One shifted his eyes toward the rooftops. The other glanced at Grace, seeking nothing but presence. She gave a nearly invisible nod in return. No orders were given, no commands whispered. Clint adjusted his posture. Slowly, without sound, he placed both hands on the pavement beside him and pressed upward. His body resisted. His joints complained, but he stood. Not quickly, not proudly, just fully. The soldiers did not break formation. They adjusted with him, turning, accommodating, guarding, without ever crowding. The wall shifted with his breath, and for the first time since the morning began, Clint stood upright, flag in his hand, eyes scanning the crowd, not for approval, but for understanding. He did not find it in every face, but he found it in enough. A woman across the square placed her hand to her chest, fingers spread wide. A man beside her lowered his phone, not because someone told him to, but because he couldn't keep filming what he now recognized as something sacred. Grace stood unmoving. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't needed to. But then, As Clint adjusted the flag beneath his arm and looked once more toward the place the old pole had stood, she moved her hand to her chest pocket and reached inside. Her hand moved slowly, fingers brushing against the inner flap of her uniform, where a small laminated card sat tucked beneath the fabric. Not a photo, not an award, just a citation, curled slightly from age, the ink worn soft by time. She pulled it free without ceremony, without drama, holding it in one hand as she stepped forward to Clint's side, her voice still held back by the weight of what was forming in the air. Clint had turned only slightly toward her, his expression unreadable but attentive. The crowd had quieted now into full silence, the kind born not of fear, but of awareness. The mockery had evaporated. In its place was something still unsure, but watching, eyes no longer scanning for targets, but searching for meaning. Grace lifted the card, and for the first time that morning, she spoke. "I didn't know for certain," she said, her voice steady but low, letting it carry only as far as it needed. "But I've heard your name before, years back. A file came across my desk when I was in training. I didn't know the face, not then, but I remember the citation. Fallujah. November 2004. Clint blinked once, slow. His body remained still, the flag now gently cradled in the crook of his arm, his hand resting on top like it was still part of him. "They said a Humvee was hit," Grace continued. "Outside the southern checkpoint. Flames were already up, ammunition cooking off inside. They said everyone thought the men were gone. No movement, no orders. But one Marine broke the line. Went in anyway." She looked at him now, not with admiration, but with confirmation. "That was you. They didn't list your name in the public version, but I remember the notes. You went back twice. Once to pull your commanding officer. Once more for a wounded private. Third time, you collapsed before you made it out." Clint didn't answer, but he didn't look away. "You stayed unconscious for a week," Grace said, glancing briefly toward the card. "Third-degree burns, shrapnel in your leg. Medics said you'd never walk right again." She lowered the card now, letting it fall slowly to her side. "But here you are." There was a shift behind her. One of the younger guardsmen stepped forward, not to interrupt but to affirm. He spoke just once, his voice soft, hands loose at his side. "I've heard of him too. We all have. Nobody talked about it like a legend. It wasn't a myth. It was a warning, a lesson, that there are men who do the job, even when the job is fire." Grace nodded. Her face did not change, but her eyes held something new, something weightless. "They called you the man who couldn't stop walking, because you wouldn't quit. Not for an order, not for flames, not for anything." A hush fell deeper now, like dust settling after a long quake. Even the man who had shoved Clint earlier, his hoodie still pulled over his head, jaw clenched with something he couldn't name, took a slow step back. His eyes had lowered, not in guilt, but in the recognition that he had put his hands on something ancient, something built of pain and survival and honor. Clint adjusted his grip on the flag. He still hadn't spoken, but he lifted his chin. The guard beside Grace stepped forward once more and extended an arm toward Clint, not to shake, not to salute. He simply placed a hand on the veteran's shoulder and held it there, still. In that single gesture was all the apology the square could offer. No parade would be held, no ceremony scheduled. But for the first time that day, everyone knew who Clint Bishop was. The silence held for a moment longer, then stretched into something deeper. No longer uncertainty, but reverence. Not the kind born from protocol or performance, but the kind that made even the wind feel like it was holding its breath. Clint Bishop stood in the center of the square, not triumphant, not vindicated, but simply present, his shoulders back, the flag pressed against his chest, and the decades behind his eyes plain to see. The circle of soldiers around him didn't move. They didn't blink. Their presence had stopped the chaos, but it hadn't done so with dominance. It had done so with quiet strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need to explain itself. They weren't defending a man. They were honoring a history that had walked back into the fire long before any of them had worn the uniform. Then, a new sound entered the space. Not boots, not chants. The deliberate rhythm of formal shoes, soft on approach, but certain. A few heads turned. From the far end of the square, flanked by two aides, the mayor of the town stepped forward. No announcement had been made, no speeches prepared. But something in the morning's silence had reached City Hall, and now it had come in person. The mayor paused at the edge of the formation. He didn't ask permission to enter. He simply removed his cap and placed it over his heart. "Mr. Bishop," he said, his voice careful, the kind used when speaking at funerals or beside fresh bronze. "I believe this square owes you something." Clint didn't answer. He didn't nod. He simply looked forward, still holding the flag, still standing. The mayor turned to his aide and murmured something. The young man nodded, stepped aside, and tapped quickly into his phone. Within minutes, the sound of footsteps returned. Not soldiers this time, but local residents, contractors, public works employees, business owners. A truck appeared at the edge of the square with a fresh steel pole secured in its bed, paint still tacky on its surface. The mayor turned back to Clint. "They cut down your flagpole," he said, voice low. "We'll build one they can't cut." The statement hung in the air. Not as a promise, but as a declaration. Clint didn't speak, but this time he nodded. Once. Deliberate, as though giving permission. Behind him, Grace Nolan watched quietly. She hadn't stepped away. She stood just behind Clint's right shoulder now, like a second shadow. Her hand remained at her side, her rifle slung again across her chest, but lowered, neutral. Not a weapon today, just part of the uniform. Someone in the crowd knelt near the remains of the old pole, just a broken stump of rusted steel still embedded in concrete. A welder placed his gloved hand on the base and shook his head once. "Can't patch this," he murmured. "Need to start fresh." "Then start," said the mayor. A pause. Then the contractor looked at Clint. "You okay with it standing here, sir?" Clint studied the ground for a beat, then ran a hand slowly over the place where the old pole had stood. His fingertips brushed over the rough edge of metal, the rust flaking off into his palm. Finally, he looked up and said, "Here's fine." And so they began. The crew moved fast, but with intention. Tools were unwrapped, anchors set. A small portable jackhammer cut through the old concrete, the sound muffled beneath the gravity of the day. The new pole, thicker, taller, built from reinforced steel, was brought forward like a torch, carried by 3 men as if it were a flag itself. In the meantime, a local engraver stepped through the quiet. He held a black velvet cloth in one hand. Beneath it, a plaque. It wasn't flashy, just brass, brushed and simple. He turned to the mayor. "Ready?" The mayor looked to Clint. Clint looked to the flag. Then he gave another small nod. The engraver stepped forward and mounted the plaque at the base of the new pole. He brushed it once with a cloth, then stepped back. The letters gleamed in the morning sun. "Bishop's Watch, for those who rise early and stand tall." A whisper passed through the crowd, an exhale more than words. The people who had once come to shout now stood with their hands to their sides, or to their hearts, or in their pockets. But they stood. Not one had left. And then came a new sight. One by one, civilians stepped forward, not to speak, not to pose, but to stand beside the wall of camouflage and rifles. A grocer in an apron, a teacher with her ID badge still clipped to her collar, a bus driver in his city-issued jacket. No words passed between them. They simply stood there, shoulder to shoulder with the guard, forming a new line, one not of defense, but of presence. Even the young man who had shoved Clint earlier lingered at the edge of the crowd, his head low. He didn't speak, but he didn't walk away either. The square had changed, not with declarations, not with punishment, but with memory. 1 week later, the square looked unchanged to the casual eye, but those who had been there knew better. The new flagpole stood tall at the plaza's center, its base still edged with faint scarring from the old. Around it, the brick had been swept clean, the ash and debris long removed. Yet something remained in the air, an imprint, not of violence, but of presence, of quiet return. Clint Bishop arrived without announcement, the same way he always had. He wore a clean shirt, pressed with care. The sleeves rolled precisely once. His gait was deliberate, the right leg dragging ever so slightly, the rhythm of old injury folded into muscle memory. In one hand, he carried the same flag, its colors now vivid again, edges crisp from a fresh hand-washing. He had refused to replace it. "This one's been through it," he'd said. "Like me, still worth raising." The square wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. A small gathering waited by the pole. Grace Nolan stood at parade rest, her helmet under her arm once again, her expression unreadable except for the set of her jaw. Quiet, solid, resolute. Behind her, the same squad that had once formed a barrier now stood with hands behind their backs. Not in uniform formation, but present nonetheless. Some wore standard fatigues, others wore jeans and jackets, having returned on their own time. Civilians lined the brick perimeter. A grandmother with a walker, a teenager in a band hoodie, a father holding his daughter on his hip. No one made a sound as Clint approached. No one moved. When he reached the base of the pole, he stopped. For a moment, he simply looked up. The wind moved faintly, brushing the leaves in the nearby sycamore, the sound like whispering pages. Clint knelt, not stiffly, but deliberately, and unwrapped the flag. His fingers moved with a practiced grace, not fast, not showy. He examined the metal clasp on the new pole, then reached up and hooked the flag to the line. His arm shook just slightly, but he steadied it with his free hand. Then, standing straight, he began to pull. The fabric rose slowly, inch by inch, catching the morning light. Red, white, blue. When it reached the peak, Clint tied it off, checked the tension once, then stepped back. The moment held. No music played. No speeches followed. But then the smallest movement began to ripple across the crowd. A hand raised to a brow, another to a chest. Some simply bowed their heads. Clint remained still. Then, to his left, Grace stepped forward and lifted her hand in salute. She held it for a full breath. When she dropped it, she said nothing. She didn't need to. One by one, those gathered began to turn, not away, but back to their lives. Some lingered, some waited for a word. Clint offered none, but he did give nods, small, deliberate, precise. A gesture older than any anthem. Then came the one no one expected. The young man, the one who had once slammed Clint to the ground, approached slowly, hands empty, hoodie down. He didn't look left or right, only at the base of the flagpole. He paused, uncertain, then reached into his pocket. From it he drew a small object, simple, humble, a pin, a miniature American flag, metal-backed, the kind handed out at parades long ago. He stepped to the brass plaque, looked once toward Clint, then knelt. He pressed the pin into the dirt at the base, then stood and walked away. He didn't speak. Clint watched him go, his eyes unreadable. But for the first time all morning, a breath escaped him, a long, steady exhale that carried not relief, but return. This was not about forgiveness. This was about remembrance. And now, Thursday mornings had changed. People began to arrive each week, not to protest, not to grandstand, just to stand. Some brought coffee, some brought nothing but their presence. The square became a kind of quiet chapel, one not built for sermons but for stillness. Clint came each time, raised the same flag, folded the same corner, adjusted the same knot, and each time, Grace stood behind him, as did others. No words passed between them, but something far more lasting did. Some stand by shouting, some stand by watching. But the ones who carry us, they stand quietly, Until we remember, if stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.